The blood-red sunset painted the Montana sky as Penny Walker's fingers hovered over the crumpled telegram. She'd read it so many times the paper had worn thin, but the words still hit her like a physical blow. Eleanor sold to settle father's debts. Gone to Silver Gulch. Don't follow. Penny's hands shook as she folded the telegram and tucked it back into her dress pocket. 3 weeks since she'd received it. 3 weeks of nightmares about what might be happening to her younger sister. At 19, Eleanor was barely more than a girl, trusting and gentle-natured. Their father had been a drunk and a gambler who'd squandered what little they had before his death last winter. But Penny never imagined he'd gone so far as to use Eleanor as collateral. The coach rattled to a stop outside Kelton's only hotel, a weathered 2-story building that had seen better days. It was 1879, and the mining boom that had once made this corner of Montana territory prosperous was beginning to wane. Penny stepped down, clutching her small valise, trying to ignore the stares of men lounging on the hotel's porch. At 23, traveling alone was dangerous enough, but she had no choice. Room for the night, she told the clerk, sliding over coins she couldn't afford to spend. The clerk, a thin man with yellowed teeth, eyed her suspiciously. "You alone, miss?" "Yes," Penny replied firmly, "just passing through." "Heading where, if you don't mind my asking?" "Silver Gulch." The clerk's expression changed. "Silver Gulch, that's no place for a lady." "Nevertheless, that's where I'm going." Penny held his gaze. "I need to find someone who knows the area. A guide, perhaps." The clerk snorted. "Good luck finding someone willing to take you there. That place is run by Victor Harlow and his men. They don't appreciate visitors." Penny felt a chill at the name. Victor Harlow, mining baron with a reputation, owns half the claims and all the trouble in Silver Gulch. The clerk lowered his voice. "Word is he's got himself a collection of women who didn't exactly volunteer for the position, if you take my meaning." Penny's stomach turned. "Where might I find someone brave enough to take me there?" The clerk hesitated, then jerked his thumb toward the saloon across the street. "Try the Wild Horse. If anyone's fool enough to cross Harlow, they'll be in there drinking away the memory of the last time they tried." Penny nodded her thanks, took the key and climbed the stairs to her room. It was small and sparse, but clean enough. She set her valise down and moved to the window, which overlooked the dusty main street of Kelton. The saloon across the way was already busy despite the early hour, piano music tinkling through the swinging doors. After washing the travel dust from her face and hands, Penny changed into her one decent dress. It was navy blue with a high collar, modest but flattering. She pinned her auburn hair tightly at the nape of her neck and took a deep breath. Ladies didn't go into saloons alone, but she wasn't here to preserve her reputation. The Wild Horse Saloon smelled of whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed bodies. Conversation dimmed momentarily as Penny stepped through the doors, then resumed with added interest. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, ignoring the whispers and stares as she approached the bar. "I'm looking for someone who knows Silver Gulch," she said to the barkeep, a burly man with a thick mustache. "Ain't we all?" he replied with a chuckle. "What's your business there?" "My own," she answered firmly. "I can pay for a guide." A voice spoke from behind her. "Silver Gulch ain't a place for sightseeing, madam." Penny turned to find a man watching her from a corner table. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark blonde hair that brushed his collar and a several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. His clothes were trail-worn but of good quality, and the gun at his hip looked well used. "I'm not interested in sightseeing," Penny replied. The man gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Then maybe you'd better explain what you are interested in." Penny hesitated, then crossed to his table and sat down back straight, hands folded in her lap. "I'm looking for my sister. She was taken to Silver Gulch against her will. The stranger's blue eyes narrowed. Taken by whom? I believe by a man named Victor Harlow. A muscle ticked in the stranger's jaw. Then I'm sorry for your loss, madam. Nobody comes back from Harlow's. She's not lost, Penny said fiercely. Not yet, and I intend to find her. You'll get yourself killed or worse. I don't have a choice. Penny leaned forward. I need someone who knows the area, someone who isn't afraid of this Harlow person. The man took a slow sip of his whiskey. And you think that's me because? Because you're still alive after saying his name without lowering your voice. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Observant. He studied her for a moment longer. Name's Blake Holcomb, Penny Walker. Well, Miss Walker, even if I were inclined to help you, which I'm not, Harlow's compound is like a fortress. Guards, dogs, the works. And he doesn't take kindly to people trying to steal what he considers his property. Penny flinched at the word property but kept her voice steady. I have money. Not enough. Then what would be enough, Mr. Holcomb? Blake leaned back in his chair. Nothing you could offer. I make my living bringing in men with bounties on their heads, not rescuing damsels in distress. My sister's name is Eleanor, Penny said quietly. She's 19 years old. Our mother died when we were children. Our father gambled away everything we had, and then apparently sold my sister to settle a debt before he drank himself to death. She's all I have left in this world, Mr. Holcomb, and I will find her with or without your help. Blake's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. How do you know she's still alive? Penny swallowed hard. I don't, but until I know otherwise, I have to believe she is. Blake drained his glass and set it down with a decisive thump. Get yourself back on the next stage out of Kelton, Miss Walker. Go home. There's nothing for you in Silver Gulch but heartache. He stood up, dropped some coins on the table and walked out, leaving Penny alone with her desperation. She watched him go, fighting back tears of frustration. The sun had fully set outside and lamps were being lit along the street. Penny remained at the table, trying to formulate a new plan. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the three men approach until they were looming over her. Well, well, said one, a tall man with a pockmarked face. Heard you asking about Silver Gulch. I might know a thing or two about the place. Penny looked up, instantly wary. Are you offering to help me? The man grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. Could be, for the right price. His two companions snickered. I can pay for information, Penny said carefully, noting how the men had positioned themselves to block her exit. I bet you can, the man replied, reaching out to touch a lock of her hair that had come loose. Penny jerked away. Please don't touch me. Don't be like that, sweetheart. We're just being friendly. His hand moved to her shoulder, gripping it firmly. The lady said not to touch her. Blake Holcomb had reappeared at the edge of the table, his stance casual but his eyes hard. The pockmarked man scowled. This ain't your business, Holcomb. I'm making it my business. Blake's hand rested on the butt of his revolver. The lady's with me. A tense silence fell over their corner of the saloon. Penny held her breath, watching the calculation in the pockmarked man's eyes as he assessed his odds against Blake Holcomb. Didn't know you were spoken for, the man finally muttered to Penny. He gestured to his friends and they backed away, retreating to the bar. Blake took the seat across from her again. You shouldn't be in a place like this alone. I didn't have much choice, Penny replied. Thank you for your assistance. Blake studied her face. You really are planning to go to Silver Gulch on your own, aren't you? Yes. He let out a long sigh. When's the last time you ate something? Penny blinked, surprised by the question. This morning. On the stage. Blake nodded and signaled to the barkeep. 2 plates of whatever's hot. He turned back to Penny. If we're going to talk business, might as well do it over supper. Hope flared in Penny's chest, but she tempered it. Does that mean you're reconsidering? It means I'm listening. Tell me everything you know about your sister and how she ended up with Harlow. Over plates of surprisingly decent stew, Penny told Blake about the telegram, about her father's gambling debts, and about her and Eleanor's life in Missouri before their father's death. We were getting by, she explained. I teach at the school, and Eleanor was apprenticing with the dressmaker. After father died, we thought the worst was behind us. Then 3 weeks ago, I received the telegram. It was signed by someone named Jenkins, who claimed to be father's former associate. He said father had used Eleanor as collateral for a loan, and when he died without paying, Eleanor was sent to settle the debt. Blake's expression had grown increasingly grim. And you came all this way alone, on the word of a telegram. What choice did I have? The local sheriff said it wasn't his jurisdiction. I couldn't just leave her. You have the telegram. Penny reached into her pocket and handed over the worn paper. Blake read it, his brow furrowed. This Jenkins, he said slowly. Any idea who he is? Penny shook her head. I've never heard father mention him, but father had many associates that he didn't bring home. Blake handed the telegram back. Harlow has a mining operation in Silver Gulch, but that's just the legitimate side of his business. He also runs girls, smuggles liquor across the Canadian border, and has a hand in just about every illegal activity in this part of the territory. He's wanted in 3 states, but no marshal has managed to get close enough to serve the warrants. Then how do we get to him? Blake raised an eyebrow. You're considering it or you wouldn't still be sitting here, Penny pointed out. A reluctant smile tugged at Blake's mouth. You're not what I expected, Miss Walker. Please call me Penny. All right, Penny. Blake leaned forward, lowering his voice. Here's the truth of it. I've been tracking Harlow for months. There's a substantial bounty on his head, but more than that, he killed a friend of mine, a marshal who got too close to his operation. Penny felt a flutter of hope. So you were already planning to go to Silver Gulch? I've been gathering information, waiting for the right moment. Harlow's compound is well guarded and he rarely leaves it. But in 2 days, there's a big poker game in Silver Gulch. Harlow never misses it. It might be our best chance to find out where they're keeping your sister. Our chance, Penny repeated. Does that mean you'll help me? Blake studied her face. On one condition. You do exactly what I say when I say it. No arguments, no heroics. If I tell you to run, you run. If I tell you to hide, you hide. Understood? Yes, Penny agreed immediately. I mean it, Penny. Harlow's men won't hesitate to kill you or worse, and if they catch you, I can't guarantee I'll be able to get you out. I understand the risks. Blake nodded slowly. We'll leave at first light. It's a day's ride to Silver Gulch. He stood up. Get some rest. You'll need it. Thank you, Penny said quietly. I know you're doing this for your own reasons, but thank you all the same. Blake's expression softened slightly. Don't thank me yet. We haven't found your sister. But we will, Penny said with determination. We have to. Blake didn't answer, just tipped his hat and left her alone with her thoughts and the remains of her supper. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Penny had barely slept, her mind churning with worry for Eleanor and preparation for the journey ahead. She dressed in her most practical clothes, a simple skirt, blouse, and sturdy boots, and pulled her hair back under a wide-brimmed hat. Her savings were secured in a pouch tied around her waist, hidden beneath her clothing. Blake was waiting for her outside the hotel with 2 horses, a tall chestnut gelding for himself and a smaller, dun-colored mare for her. Can you ride? He asked by way of greeting. Yes, Penny replied, approaching the mare and stroking her nose. We had horses back home. Blake nodded approvingly. Good. It's rough country between here and Silver Gulch. He helped her secure her valise behind the saddle, then handed her the reins. Penny mounted smoothly, settling into the saddle with practiced ease. Blake seemed satisfied with her horsemanship and swung onto his own mount. They rode out of Kelton as the town was just beginning to stir, taking the trail northwest into increasingly rugged terrain. Blake set a steady pace, and Penny was grateful for her comfortable saddle as the hours wore on. He wasn't much for conversation, answering her occasional questions with brief responses, but offering little else. By midday, they stopped to rest the horses by a small creek. Penny stretched her legs while Blake refilled their canteens. "How did you become a bounty hunter?" she asked as they shared a simple meal of jerky and hard biscuits. Blake took his time answering. "Fell into it after the war. I was good with a gun, good at tracking. Seemed a better way to use those skills than robbing banks." "You fought in the war?" Penny asked, trying to calculate his age. "Enlisted at 17, cavalry." His tone discouraged further questions on that topic. "And your friend, the marshal that Harlow killed, James," Blake supplied. "James Coburn. We served together. He was a good man, had a wife and 2 kids back in Denver." "I'm sorry," Penny said softly. Blake nodded, his jaw tight. "Harlow's going to pay for that, one way or another." They continued riding through the afternoon, the landscape growing more dramatic with each mile. Penny marveled at the towering pines and the rocky outcroppings that punctuated the horizon. Despite the circumstances, there was a wild beauty to this country that took her breath away. As the sun began to dip, Blake led them off the trail into a sheltered grove of trees. "We'll camp here tonight," he announced, dismounting. "Should reach Silver Gulch by tomorrow afternoon." They worked together to set up a small camp. Penny gathered firewood while Blake tended to the horses. Soon, a small fire was crackling, and Blake was heating a pot of coffee over the flames. "You're not what I expected either, Mr. Holcomb," Penny observed as they sat beside the fire. "Blake," he corrected. "And what did you expect? I'm not sure. Someone rougher, perhaps, less principled." He gave a short laugh. "Don't mistake self-interest for principles. I want Harlow, and you provide a convenient reason to go after him." "Is that all it is?" Penny challenged gently. "You could have left me in that saloon. You didn't have to warn me away from Silver Gulch in the first place." Blake stared into the fire. "Let's get one thing straight. I'm not a hero from one of those dime novels. I've done things I'm not proud of. The only difference between me and some of the men I hunt is that I try to stay on the right side of the law." "I think there's more to it than that," Penny said. "But regardless of your motivations, I'm grateful for your help." Blake's eyes met hers across the fire, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or a recognition of shared purpose that transcended their different backgrounds and experiences. "Tell me about your sister," Blake said, changing the subject. Penny smiled, her face softening with affection. "Eleanor is kind. She always sees the best in people, even when they don't deserve it. She's talented with a needle and thread, can create the most beautiful dresses you've ever seen. She was always Father's favorite, though she never used it to her advantage. If anything, she tried to protect me from his moods." "Sounds like she takes after her sister," Blake observed. Penny shook her head. "I'm not like Eleanor. She's gentle. I've always been the practical one, the one who argues and fights." "And the one who crosses half the country to save her sister," Blake pointed out. "That takes courage and determination." Penny felt a blush warm her cheeks and was grateful for the firelight that masked it. "Anyone would do the same for family." "No," Blake said firmly. "They wouldn't. Most would have accepted the loss and moved on. You didn't." They fell silent, the crackling of the fire and the soft nickering of the horses the only sounds in the gathering darkness. Penny felt strangely comfortable in Blake's presence, despite the danger that lay ahead. There was a steadiness to him that inspired confidence. "You should get some rest," Blake finally said. "I'll take first watch." Penny nodded and moved to her bedroll. "Wake me when it's my turn." Blake's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Sleep, Penny. I've gone longer than one night without shutting my eyes." She wanted to protest, but found herself suddenly exhausted. As she drifted off, the last thing she saw was Blake's profile against the firelight, his eyes alert and watchful in the darkness. Penny woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Dawn was just breaking, pale light filtering through the trees. Blake was already up, tending to a fresh fire and preparing breakfast. "You didn't wake me," she accused, sitting up and brushing her hair back from her face. "Wasn't necessary," Blake replied, handing her a tin cup of coffee. "You needed the rest more than I needed the sleep." Penny accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling its rich aroma. "Thank you." They ate quickly and broke camp as the sun cleared the horizon. The day promised to be warm, and Penny was glad for her hat as they rode out of the sheltering trees and into open country. The landscape grew increasingly stark as they traveled, with less vegetation and more exposed rock. By midday, Blake led them up a steep trail that wound around a rocky hill. At the crest, he reined in his horse and gestured for Penny to do the same. "There it is," he said. "Silver Gulch." Penny followed his gaze down into a narrow valley where a cluster of buildings huddled along a winding creek. Even from this distance, the town looked rough and unwelcoming, a far cry from the neat streets of Kelton or her hometown in Missouri. "Doesn't look like much," she observed. "It's not," Blake agreed. "But what it lacks in charm, it makes up for in danger. Harlow's compound is there at the north end." He pointed to a large structure set apart from the rest of the town, surrounded by a high fence. Penny's heart sank at the sight of the compound. It did indeed look like a fortress, just as Blake had warned. "How will we ever get in there?" "We won't, not directly. But Harlow will be at the poker game tonight at the Golden Nugget." Blake nodded toward a large building in the center of town. "While he's distracted, I'll see what I can find out about where they keep the women." "I should come with you," Penny said. Blake shook his head firmly. "Too dangerous. You'll stay at the boarding house under an assumed name. Mrs. Billings runs it. She's no friend to Harlow, but she knows better than to cross him openly." "But this isn't negotiable, Penny," Blake cut her off. "You show your face around town asking questions, and word will get back to Harlow before sunset." Penny wanted to argue but remembered her promise to follow his instructions. "Fine, but I won't sit idly by if there's any way I can help," Blake sighed. "Just stay out of sight for now. Once I know more, we can make a plan." They rode down into the valley, approaching Silver Gulch from the south. As they drew closer, Penny could see that the town was even more disreputable than it had appeared from a distance. Many of the buildings were little more than shacks, and those that weren't looked worn and neglected. Men lounged on porches and in doorways, watching them with undisguised interest as they rode past. Blake led her to a two-story clapboard house set slightly apart from the main street. A small sign identified it as Billings Boarding House. "Wait here," he instructed, dismounting and tying his horse to the hitching post. He disappeared inside, returning a few minutes later. "Mrs. Billings has a room at the back. It's yours for as long as we need it." Penny dismounted and Blake helped her with her valise. "What name did you give her?" "Told her you're Mrs. Holcomb, my wife, here to recuperate from illness while I conduct business in town," Blake replied. "Mrs. Billings doesn't ask too many questions, but it's better if Harlow's men think you're spoken for." Penny nodded, trying to ignore the strange flutter in her chest at the word wife. It was just a practical measure, nothing more. Mrs. Billings turned out to be a stout woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She showed Penny to a small but clean room at the back of the house, overlooking a dusty yard and the hills beyond. Meals are at 7, noon, and 6, she informed Penny. Kitchens closed otherwise. No men in the rooms, not even husbands. She gave Blake a pointed look. Understood, Penny assured her when Mrs. Billings had gone. Blake lowered his voice. I'll head into town, see what I can find out. Lock your door and don't open it for anyone but me. I'll knock 3 times, pause, then twice more. How long will you be gone? Penny asked. Hard to say. The poker game doesn't start until after dark, but I need to establish myself in town before then. Blake hesitated, then added, if I'm not back by morning, take the stage out of here. It leaves at 10. I'm not leaving without Eleanor, Penny said firmly. Blake's expression hardened. Yes, you are. If something happens to me, your best chance is to get back to Kelton and find the territorial marshal. Understood? Penny wanted to protest, but nodded reluctantly. Understood. Good. Blake's face softened slightly. Try to rest. Tonight could be a long one. After he left, Penny unpacked her few belongings and tried to settle in. The room was sparse but comfortable enough, with a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a washstand. A faded sampler on the wall read "Home Sweet Home," which struck Penny as oddly ironic given the circumstances. Rest proved impossible. Penny paced the small room, peering out the window at the town below, imagining Eleanor somewhere in Harlow's compound. Was she hurt? Frightened? Did she believe Penny had abandoned her? The questions tormented her, feeding her anxiety. As the afternoon wore on, Penny forced herself to develop a contingency plan. If Blake couldn't find Eleanor, or if something went wrong, she needed to be prepared to act on her own. She counted her remaining money, studied the layout of the town from her window, and considered her options. None seemed promising. At 6, Mrs. Billings knocked to announce supper. The boarding house's dining room was occupied by 2 other guests, a traveling salesman and an elderly woman who introduced herself as a widow visiting her son. They made polite conversation, careful to avoid any mention of Victor Harlow or his business in town. After the meal, Penny returned to her room and waited, watching through the window as the town came to life in the gathering darkness. Lamps were lit in the saloons and gambling halls, and music drifted up the hill. The Golden Nugget blazed with light, men streaming through its doors as the evening progressed. Hours passed. Penny's anxiety grew with each tick of the small clock on the dresser. What if Blake couldn't find any information about Eleanor? What if he'd been discovered? What if Eleanor wasn't even in Silver Gulch anymore? Just when Penny was beginning to fear the worst, 3 sharp knocks sounded on her door, followed by a pause, then 2 more. She rushed to open it. Blake stepped inside quickly, closing the door behind him. His expression was grim but determined. "Did you find her?" Penny asked breathlessly. "Not yet, but I know where to look," Blake said. "Harlow keeps the women in a separate building behind the main house, a sort of bunkhouse with guards posted at the doors." "How many women are there?" "From what I heard, about a dozen. Some work in his saloons and gambling halls. Others—" Blake hesitated. "Others are kept for his private entertainment or sold to his business associates." Penny felt sick. "We have to get them all out." Blake shook his head. "We focus on finding Eleanor first. Getting even one woman out of there will be nearly impossible. I'm not promising miracles." "How do we get in?" "Harlow's deep into the poker game. He'll be there for hours. I managed to get the attention of one of the women who works at the Golden Nugget, Sadie. She's been there 2 years and knows the compound. She says new girls are kept under lock and key until they're broken in, as she put it." Penny flinched at the terminology but pressed on. "Where would that be?" "There are rooms in the cellar of the main house. That's most likely where Eleanor would be if she's newly arrived." Blake ran a hand through his hair. "Sadie's going to create a distraction in about an hour. There's a side gate with only 1 guard. She says he drinks on duty, That's our way in." "I'm coming with you," Penny said firmly. This time, Blake didn't argue. "You'll need to change into something less conspicuous. Sadie gave me these." He handed Penny a bundle of clothing. Penny unfolded the garments, a dark skirt and blouse, plainer and more worn than her own clothes. "Turn around," she instructed. Blake obliged, facing the wall while Penny quickly changed. The clothes were slightly too large but would serve the purpose. "Ready," she said when she'd finished. Blake turned back and nodded approvingly. "Keep your head down and follow my lead. If anything goes wrong, run. Don't wait for me, don't try to help, just run. And Eleanor, if we find her, we get her out and head straight for the horses. I've left them saddled at the edge of town. We ride for Kelton immediately." The plan was simple, perhaps too simple, but Penny couldn't see any alternative. "Let's go," she said. They slipped out of the boarding house and made their way through the shadows toward Harlow's compound. The night was clear, the moon nearly full, which would make their task both easier and more dangerous. They could see their way, but so could any guards watching for intruders. Blake led her along back alleys and through yards, avoiding the main street where they might be noticed. As they approached the compound, Penny could see the high fence that surrounded it, the main house looming dark and imposing within its perimeter. They crouched behind a pile of crates across from the side gate Blake had mentioned. A single guard stood there, occasionally taking swigs from a flask. "When Sadie creates the distraction, I'll take care of the guard," Blake whispered. "Once we're inside, stay close to the wall. The main house is to the left, the women's quarters to the right." Penny nodded, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the guard would hear it. They didn't have to wait long. Suddenly, shouts and the sound of breaking glass erupted from the front of the compound. The guard straightened, looking toward the commotion. Blake tensed beside Penny, ready to move. When the guard stepped away from his post to investigate the noise, Blake surged forward. He struck the man from behind with the butt of his revolver, catching him as he fell and dragging him into the shadows. "Now," Blake hissed, and Penny darted across to the gate. The compound yard was dark except for a few lamps near the main buildings. They hugged the fence line, making their way toward the main house. A few guards were visible near the front, but they were all focused on the disturbance. Whatever Sadie had arranged was proving effective. They reached the main house without incident. Blake tried a side door and found it unlocked. They slipped inside, finding themselves in a dim hallway. "Cellar," Blake whispered, pointing to a door at the end of the hall. They moved carefully, freezing at every creak of the floorboards. The house was eerily quiet, most of its occupants apparently at the front dealing with the disturbance. The cellar door was locked. Blake produced a set of picks from his pocket and worked on the lock while Penny kept watch. After what seemed like an eternity, the lock clicked and the door swung open. Stone steps led down into darkness. Blake drew his gun and led the way, Penny close behind. At the bottom of the stairs, a single lamp illuminated a dank corridor with several doors leading off it. All were locked from the outside. "Eleanor," Penny called softly, moving to the first door. "Eleanor, are you here?" A shuffling sound came from the third door. "Who's there?" A woman's voice called, trembling and uncertain. Penny's heart leaped. "Eleanor, it's Penny. Penny." The voice was incredulous. "Oh God, Penny, is it really you?" Blake was already working on the lock. "Stand back from the door," he instructed. When the door swung open, Penny rushed inside. In the dim light, she could make out a figure huddled on a narrow cot. Eleanor looked up, her face pale and drawn but otherwise unharmed. "Penny," Eleanor sobbed, throwing her arms around her sister. "How did you find me?" "No time for explanations," Blake said from the doorway. "We need to move, now." Eleanor pulled back, staring at Blake with fear. "Who is he?" "A friend," Penny assured her. "He's helping me rescue you. Can you walk?" Eleanor nodded, getting shakily to her feet. She was dressed in a simple cotton shift, her feet bare. "There are others," she whispered. "Down here, like me." Blake hesitated, conflict evident on his face. "How many?" "3 others, I think. I've heard them crying." Blake swore under his breath, then moved to the next door, working quickly with his picks. Inside was another young woman, curled up in the corner, her eyes wide with terror. "We're getting you out of here," Blake told her. "All of you." One by one, they freed the women, 4 in total, including Eleanor. All were young, frightened, and dressed in similar shifts. One had bruises on her arms and face. "Stay together and stay quiet," Blake instructed them. "Follow me." They moved as a group back up the stairs, Blake in the lead, Penny bringing up the rear. At the top of the stairs, Blake paused, listening. Hearing nothing, he opened the door cautiously and peered out into the hallway. "Clear," he whispered. "Let's go." They had just reached the side door when a voice called out, "Hold it right there." Blake whirled, pushing the women behind him. A man stood at the end of the hallway, gun drawn. Behind him were 2 more armed men. "Run," Blake shouted, drawing his own weapon. "Out the door now." Penny grabbed Eleanor's hand and pushed the other women toward the exit. Gunshots exploded behind them as they tumbled out into the night. Penny pulled Eleanor toward the gate, the other women following. More shouts erupted across the compound. Guards were running toward them from the main disturbance. "This way," Penny called, leading them toward the side gate. They were halfway there when more guards appeared, cutting off their escape. "Back." Penny pulled Eleanor toward a stack of crates near the fence. "We'll have to climb." The women scrambled onto the crates, helping each other up to the top of the fence. Penny boosted Eleanor over first, then the others, ignoring the splinters tearing at her hands. Gunshots rang out, wood splintering around them as the guards opened fire. Penny was the last to climb. As she reached the top of the fence, a bullet whizzed past her head. She looked back toward the house and saw Blake backing toward them, exchanging fire with the guards. "Blake!" she screamed. He glanced up, saw her on the fence. "Go!" he yelled. "Get them out!" Penny hesitated, torn between escape and going back for him. "Go, damn it!" Blake shouted, firing again at the advancing guards. With a silent prayer, Penny dropped to the other side of the fence, gathered the terrified women, and led them through the shadows toward the edge of town where Blake had left the horses. There were only 2 mounts. Penny helped Eleanor onto one, instructing the other 3 women to head for the boarding house. "Ask for Mrs. Billings. Tell her Penny sent you. She'll help." "What about you?" one of the women asked. "I'm going back for Blake," Penny said, mounting the second horse. "Eleanor, go with them." "Penny, no," Eleanor protested. "I can't leave him," Penny said firmly. "Get to safety, I'll find you." Before Eleanor could argue further, Penny wheeled the horse around and rode back toward the compound. She couldn't abandon Blake, not after all he'd risked to help her. As she approached, she saw that the compound was in chaos. Men were shouting, running in all directions. Gunfire still echoed sporadically. Penny dismounted and tied the horse to a tree, then crept closer, trying to determine what was happening. A figure stumbled out of the shadows, Blake holding his side, blood seeping through his fingers. "Blake!" Penny rushed to him. "Told you to run," he gasped. "I got the women to safety," Penny said, supporting him. "Come on, the horse is this way." She helped him to the horse and somehow managed to get him into the saddle. She climbed up behind him, one arm around his waist to keep him from falling. "We need to get out of Silver Gulch," Blake said through gritted teeth. "Harlow will have men searching everywhere." "We will," Penny promised, urging the horse forward. "Just hold on." They rode through the night, avoiding the main roads, Blake growing increasingly weak in Penny's arms. She could feel his blood soaking into her clothes, but she kept going, determined to put as much distance between them and Silver Gulch as possible. Dawn was breaking when Blake finally said, "Stop. Can't. Go further." Penny guided the exhausted horse into a stand of trees near a small stream. She helped Blake down, easing him to the ground against a tree trunk. In the growing light she could see how pale he was, his shirt soaked with blood. "Let me see," she said, gently pulling his hand away from the wound. The bullet had torn through his side, leaving an ugly gash. It wasn't immediately life-threatening, but he'd lost a lot of blood. "Need to clean it," Penny murmured, tearing strips from her petticoat. She helped him out of his shirt and used water from the stream to wash the wound, then bound it tightly with the makeshift bandages. "Eleanor?" Blake asked weakly. "Safe, thanks to you. I sent her and the others to Mrs. Billings." Blake nodded, his eyes closing. "Smart. Harlow won't. Look there." "Rest now," Penny said, stroking his hair back from his forehead. "We're safe for the moment." Blake caught her hand. "You shouldn't have come back for me." "I couldn't leave you," Penny said simply. His fingers tightened around hers. "Foolish woman." "Yes," she agreed, a small smile playing on her lips. "Very foolish." Blake's eyes opened, meeting hers. "Thank you," he whispered. Penny held his gaze, feeling something shift between them. "Rest," she repeated softly. "I'll keep watch." As Blake drifted into an uneasy sleep, Penny tended the horse and gathered what supplies she could find in the saddlebags. There was jerky, a canteen of water, and a small medical kit. She used the latter to properly clean and dress Blake's wound once he was asleep. The day passed slowly. Penny dozed intermittently, always keeping one eye on their surroundings. By evening, Blake's fever had risen, his skin hot to the touch despite the cool air. "We need to get you to a doctor," Penny said worriedly when he woke. "Can't go back to Silver Gulch," Blake mumbled. "Kelton, too far." "There must be somewhere closer," Penny insisted. Blake frowned, thinking. "Miners' camp, few miles east. Man there named Doc Wilson. Not a real doctor, but good with bullets." Penny helped Blake back onto the horse, then mounted behind him. Following his feverish directions, they rode east as the sun set, the terrain growing rougher. Blake drifted in and out of consciousness, leaning heavily against Penny. Just when Penny was beginning to fear they were lost, lights appeared ahead, the flickering glow of campfires. As they drew closer, she could make out a collection of tents and rough cabins clustered around a central clearing. Men emerged as they approached, hands on their weapons. Penny called out, "We need help. My friend is wounded." An older man with a silver beard stepped forward. "Who's asking? Are you Doc Wilson?" Penny asked hopefully. "I am," the man confirmed, eyeing them suspiciously. "Blake Holcomb is hurt. He said you could help." Recognition flickered in Wilson's eyes. "Blake Holcomb, eh? Bring him in." Several men helped get Blake down from the horse and carried him to one of the larger tents. Inside, Doc Wilson had a surprisingly well-equipped setup for treating injuries. He cut away Penny's bandages and examined the wound. "Bullets gone through, that's good," he muttered. "But it's infected. He's lost a lot of blood." "Can you help him?" Penny asked anxiously. Wilson gave her a sharp look. "Who are you to him?" Penny hesitated only briefly. "His wife." Something in Wilson's expression suggested he didn't believe her, but he nodded. "I'll do what I can, but it'll be touch and go for a while." True to his word, Wilson worked through the night, cleaning the wound, applying poultices, and administering medicines from his supplies. Penny stayed by Blake's side, cooling his feverish brow with wet cloths, holding his hand when the pain made him cry out. By morning, Blake's fever had broken, and he was sleeping more peacefully. Wilson, checking his pulse, nodded with satisfaction. "He's tough, your husband. He'll pull through." "Thank you," Penny said sincerely. Wilson waved away her gratitude. "Blake saved my son from a hanging 2 years ago, proved he was innocent of a robbery I owe him." He studied Penny thoughtfully. "You're not really his wife, are you?" Penny sighed. "No, but it's complicated." "Always is with Blake," Wilson chuckled. "Rest. You look dead on your feet. I'll watch him." Penny didn't remember lying down on the cot Wilson provided, but she must have, because the next thing she knew, sunlight was streaming through the tent flap and someone was saying her name. She opened her eyes to find Blake watching her from his own cot, his color much improved, though he still looked weak. "You're awake," she said, sitting up quickly. "Been awake a while," he replied. "Watching you sleep." Penny felt a blush rising in her cheeks. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been shot," Blake said dryly. "But better than yesterday. Doc says I'll live." Penny moved to sit beside him. "You had me worried." "I heard you told him you were my wife," Blake said, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "It seemed simpler than explaining the truth," Penny replied, embarrassed. Blake caught her hand. "Thank you for coming back for me. It was a foolish, reckless thing to do, but thank you." Penny squeezed his fingers. "You saved my sister, saved those other women too. I couldn't leave you behind." They gazed at each other for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Blake cleared his throat. "We need to figure out our next move. Harlow will be looking for us and for the women." "Mrs. Billings will keep them safe for now," Penny said. "But you're right, we need a plan." "Once I can ride, we'll head to Kelton," Blake decided. "The territorial marshal has an office there. With testimony from you, Eleanor, and the other women, there will be enough to finally bring Harlow down." "Will you stay, to see it through?" Penny asked hesitantly. Blake's eyes softened. "I'll stay." For the next 3 days, Blake regained his strength while Penny helped around the miners' camp, cooking and mending to earn their keep. The miners, rough men who respected Blake's reputation, treated her with courtesy and kept their distance. On the 4th day, Doc Wilson declared Blake fit to travel, though he warned against any strenuous activity. "That means no gunfights," he added pointedly. They left the camp with supplies donated by the miners and a fresh horse for Penny. The ride to Kelton would take 2 days at an easy pace, Wilson had advised, and they should avoid Silver Gulch entirely. As they rode side by side through the rugged Montana landscape, Penny found herself stealing glances at Blake. Something had changed between them during their ordeal. A trust and understanding had developed that went beyond their initial arrangement. "What will you do after Harlow is brought to justice?" she asked as they made camp on the first night. Blake, carefully tending the fire, considered the question. "Go back to bounty hunting, I suppose. It's what I know." Penny nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment that tightened her chest. "And Eleanor and I will go back to Missouri." Blake glanced up at her. "Is that what you want?" "It's our home," Penny said, but the words lacked conviction. "Though after everything that's happened, it might not feel the same." "You could start fresh somewhere," Blake suggested. "You and Eleanor." "Perhaps." Penny hesitated, then asked, "Have you ever thought about settling down?" "Having a home of your own." Blake was quiet for a long moment. "Didn't think it was in the cards for someone like me," he finally said. "The life I lead, it doesn't lend itself to permanence." "It could," Penny said softly, "if you wanted it to." Their eyes met across the fire, and Penny saw something in Blake's gaze that made her heart beat faster. But he looked away, returning his attention to the flames. "Get some rest," he said. "Long ride tomorrow." They reached Kelton by late afternoon the following day. The town looked almost welcoming after their experiences in Silver Gulch. Blake led them directly to the boarding house where Eleanor and the other women should be waiting. Mrs. Billings greeted them at the door, her face lighting with relief. "Thank God. The girls have been worried sick." Eleanor rushed from the parlor, throwing her arms around Penny. "You came back. I was so afraid," she broke off, looking at Blake. "You're hurt." "I'll live," Blake assured her. The other women appeared grateful and anxious. They had remained hidden at the boarding house, venturing out only at night for fear of Harlow's men. "Have there been any strangers asking questions?" Blake asked Mrs. Billings. "A few men rode through yesterday," she confirmed. "Rough-looking sorts." "They were asking about 2 women and a wounded man." Blake nodded grimly. "Harlow's men, we need to move quickly." He turned to Penny. "I'm going to speak with Marshal Davis. You and the women stay here, doors locked." "I should come with you," Penny protested, "to tell him what happened." "Later," Blake said firmly. "Let me lay the groundwork first. Davis is a good man, but he needs to understand the situation before he acts." Reluctantly, Penny agreed. After Blake left, she sat with Eleanor and the other women, listening to their stories. Eleanor had been taken from Missouri by men claiming to be collecting on their father's debts. The journey had been terrifying, but she had been spared the worst abuses thanks to Harlow's absence when she arrived. "He was coming back tonight," one of the other women, Mary, said in a trembling voice. "They told us he would. Choose which of us he wanted first." Penny shuddered, grateful they had acted when they did. Hours passed with no word from Blake. Night fell and Mrs. Billings served a simple supper, but Penny could barely eat. Just as she was considering going to look for him, the front door opened and Blake entered with another man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a silver marshal's badge pinned to his vest. "Marshal Davis," Blake introduced him. "He wants to hear your stories." One by one, the women recounted their experiences, their voices growing stronger as they spoke. Marshal Davis listened intently, taking notes, his expression growing grimmer with each testimony. "This is more than enough for me to gather a posse and go after Harlow," he said when they had finished. "But I need you ladies to stay in Kelton until the trial. Your testimony will be crucial." "We'll stay," Penny assured him, speaking for the group. "I'm riding with you," Blake told Davis. The marshal looked like he wanted to object but nodded. "We leave at dawn, 10 men well armed." After Davis left, promising to post a deputy outside the boarding house for protection, Penny followed Blake to the porch. "You should be resting," she said. "Your wound, I'm well enough to ride," Blake cut her off. "I need to see this through, Penny." She stepped closer, laying a hand on his arm. "I understand, but please be careful. Harlow is dangerous and you're not fully recovered." Blake covered her hand with his own. "I've hunted more dangerous men in worse condition." "That doesn't reassure me," Penny replied with a faint smile. Blake's expression softened. "I'll come back." "You'd better," Penny said, her voice catching slightly. "We have unfinished business." Something flickered in Blake's eyes. Slowly, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss. It was brief, almost tentative, but it left Penny breathless. "Unfinished business," Blake agreed softly. "Wait for me." "I will," Penny promised. Dawn came too quickly. Penny stood on the boarding house porch with Eleanor and the other women, watching as Marshal Davis's posse assembled in the street. Blake sat tall in the saddle despite his injury, his expression determined as he checked his weapons. Before they rode out, he turned to Penny one last time. No words were needed. Everything was in his eyes, a promise to return, a future to be discussed. The waiting was agony. The day stretched endlessly, each hour marked by the ticking of Mrs. Billings's grandfather clock. Penny tried to distract herself by helping Eleanor and the other women write out their statements for the territorial judge, but her mind kept returning to Blake riding into danger. Night fell with no word. Penny sat by the window, watching the empty street, ignoring Eleanor's gentle suggestions that she try to sleep. It was well past midnight when she heard the sound of horses approaching at a walk, not a gallop. Heart in her throat, Penny rushed to the door, Eleanor close behind. The posse was returning, fewer in number than when they left. In the dim light of the street lamps, Penny searched desperately for Blake's familiar figure. Marshall Davis dismounted first, his face grim and splattered with blood. Behind him, two men supported a third, between them Blake, his shirt torn and bloody but alive. Penny ran to him. "Blake," he looked up, his face breaking into a weary smile. "Told you I'd come back. Is it over?" she asked as she helped him toward the boarding house. "It's over," Davis confirmed. "Harlow's dead, went down fighting, took 2 of my deputies with him." "The women at the compound?" Penny asked anxiously. "Free," Blake assured her. "Some had families to go back to, others are being brought to Kelton tomorrow." Inside, Mrs. Billings fussed over Blake's new injuries, a bullet graze on his arm and various cuts and bruises. "You're making a habit of this, Mr. Holcomb," she scolded. "Last time," Blake promised, his eyes on Penny. In the days that followed, Silver Gulch was transformed. With Harlow gone, Marshall Davis and his deputies rounded up his remaining men and freed the rest of the women. The territorial judge arrived to take statements and issue indictments against Harlow's associates. Blake recovered quickly, his strength returning day by day. He and Penny spent long hours talking, planning, discovering each other beyond the crisis that had brought them together. "I've been thinking," Blake said one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch, watching the sunset. "There's a piece of land for sale outside Kelton. Good water, decent grazing, might make a fine ranch someday." Penny's heart quickened. "Is that so? Thought I might settle down," Blake continued casually. "Marshall Davis offered me a deputy position, steady work, respectable." "What about bounty hunting?" Penny asked. Blake shrugged. "Done my share. Time for something new." He glanced at her. "Something permanent." Penny smiled, understanding what he was really saying. "Eleanor has been offered an apprenticeship with the dressmaker here in Kelton." "Has she now?" Blake's eyes twinkled. "And what about her sister? Any prospects?" "1 or 2, Penny replied lightly. "There's this former bounty hunter, bit rough around the edges, but he has his moments." Blake laughed, then sobered, taking her hand. "I know it's fast, Penny. We've only known each other a short time, but when you know, you know, and you know." Penny asked softly. "I do." Blake's fingers tightened around hers. "I love you, Penny Walker. Don't ask me when or how it happened, but somewhere between you demanding my help in that saloon and you coming back for me when any sensible person would have run, I fell in love with you." Tears welled in Penny's eyes. "I love you too, Blake Holcomb. Against all reason and sense, I love you." Blake pulled her into his arms, his kiss deeper and more confident than their first. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me." "Yes," Penny whispered without hesitation. They were married 2 weeks later in Kelton's small church. Eleanor stood as Penny's witness, while Marshall Davis stood for Blake. The other women they had rescued from Harlow's compound attended, along with Mrs. Billings and Doc Wilson, who had ridden in from the mining camp. Blake wore a new suit, his hair trimmed, his face clean-shaven. Penny wore a simple white dress that Eleanor had helped make. They spoke their vows with clear voices and unwavering certainty. "Not the most conventional courtship," Marshall Davis observed at the small reception afterward. "Nothing about them is conventional," Eleanor added with a smile. "But I've never seen my sister happier." The land Blake had mentioned became their home. Together, they built a sturdy cabin and began to develop the ranch, starting with a small herd of cattle. Blake served as a deputy marshal during the week and worked the land on his days off, while Penny established a small school for the children of neighboring ranches. Eleanor thrived in Kelton, her talent with a needle earning her recognition beyond the small town. She lived with them at first, but eventually took rooms above the dressmaker's shop as her independence grew. A year after their wedding, Penny gave birth to a son they named James, after Blake's fallen friend. 2 years later, a daughter joined their family. They named her Hope. On warm summer evenings, they would sit on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard, the mountains purple in the distance. Sometimes, Blake would take Penny's hand and say, "Remember that saloon in Kelton, when you demanded my help?" And Penny would smile and reply, "Best decision I ever made." They never forgot the darkness they had faced or the people who had suffered at Harlow's hands. But they had built something good and true from those terrible events: a family, a home, a life filled with love and purpose. And on the nights when memories of Silver Gulch disturbed Blake's sleep, Penny would hold him close and whisper, "We're home now. We're safe." And they were.